Hello, this is Dan Damon with your World Update Daily Commute, recorded on Thursday at 5:30 a.m. US East Coast time. Coming up, the European Parliament's being asked to approve a new law holding robots legally responsible for certain acts.
Hello.
Hi.
I've never met anyone new before. Have you?
The challenge is to show you that she's a robot and then see if you...
Well, that's the Hollywood version. What about the future reality? I asked the US ambassador to the UK in his last week in office whether Americans face an uncertain future with an incoming president engulfed by controversy.
My hope is that they will follow the advice of President Obama that the most important job title in the world is citizen.
And the plus-size dancer building her own troupe.
It got to the point where I said, you know what, I'm going to create my own lane. I'm gonna follow my own path and create a platform for other plus-size women.
First, the news.
BBC News with Jerry Smith. The Turkish Prime Minister Binali Yildirim has decided to join talks aimed at reunifying Cyprus after more than 40 years of division. Mr Yildirim's unexpected decision to attend the Foreign Ministers' meeting in Geneva has raised expectations of progress. The first of 3,000 American troops, along with tanks and armoured vehicles, have begun arriving in Poland for deployment along NATO's eastern frontier. It's part of attempts by President Obama to reassure NATO allies concerned by Russia's intervention in Ukraine. China has set itself on a potential collision course with the United States by rejecting comments that it should face consequences for island building in the South China Sea. Rex Tillerson, Donald Trump's choice to be the next US Secretary of State, said America should make China stop the construction and block its access to islands already built. An anti-terrorist judge in Belgium has charged 2 more people in connection with the Islamist attacks that killed 130 people in Paris in November 2015. The couple were arrested in the Brussels suburb of Laeken. Amazon says it has withdrawn from sale doormats viewed as insulting by the Indian government as they depict the Indian flag. It did not immediately respond to the government's demand for an apology. Members of the European Parliament are due to vote today on proposals which could form the basis of future EU legislation on artificial intelligence. Ideas under consideration include giving robots legal status as electronic persons and adopting measures designed to safeguard humans from robots. The Japanese Environment Ministry says more than 70% of the country's biggest coral reef has died off because of rising sea temperatures. Surveys throughout 2016 showed its sharp deterioration. Only 5% was dead at the beginning of the year. BBC News.
Hello, this is Dan Damon with World Update. Coming up, big women dancing and proud. That's later. First, how much do you trust robots?
Hello.
Hi.
I've never met anyone new before. Have you?
The challenge is to show you that she's a robot and then see if you still feel she has consciousness.
Well, that's a clip from the 2015 sci-fi film Ex Machina. Machines become just as smart as humans, which could happen. In the real world, members of the European Parliament are voting on a comprehensive set of rules for how humans will interact with artificial intelligence, AI, and robots. They'll decide whether to give robots legal status, electronic persons, and also they should have a kill switch. I've been speaking to Kathleen Richardson, Senior Research Fellow in the Ethics of Robotics at De Montfort University in the UK. She submitted evidence to the committee. She rejects the idea we should be calling robots electronic persons. So what are the risks?
One of the key problems is its definition of robots as electric persons. Because I think if we use that definition of a robot as an electric person, we're confusing what a robot is, and we're breaking down the distinction between people and machines. And I think that has very dangerous consequences for our society.
I can see why you would think that, and I'll ask you to explain it in a minute, but I suppose what they're worried about is that robots will be out of control, in effect, that they will be able to do things as surrogates for humans, and there'll be no comeback. They could cause damage, and nobody would be able to make claims.
I absolutely agree, and I think the sentiment behind the idea of calling them electronic persons is very good. Because we have to think, we have tax revenues, for instance, we tax people's wages. And if you introduce a robot, you take away a revenue stream, don't you? So creating a kind of legal environment where you can tax robots is potentially very good. For me, it's more about calling them electronic persons I think we could do all that, but maintain the term robot.
What about the idea of a kill switch, a mandatory kill switch?
I think that's a very good idea. I mean, I'm surrounded by some people in the robotics community who tell me that a machine is not an appliance and we should be thinking about a machine like a living agent. So imagine if we couldn't have created our world around us because we couldn't turn machines on. We kind of started treating them as though they were sentient beings. But the fact is they're not sentient beings. They are machines that are created specifically to carry out certain acts.
Well, they are, but they might be getting their own mind to make decisions, mightn't they? I mean, you probably know Robert Heinlein, the writer, predicted this, years ago, that robots would start playing pranks on humans because they would develop a sense of humor.
Well, I've yet to meet a robot with a sense of humor, but...
Not yet.
Not yet. Let's look at it this way, right? Robots are tools. They're instruments that we use as human beings in order to make our lives better. We don't want to start thinking about tools like persons because that creates problems for thinking about who we are as human beings. And it actually destroys our sense of being human as a distinct social species, which we are. Now, I think the kind of origin of this idea that an artifact or a thing could become a person actually goes back to the origins of slavery. So in the United States, for example, the American Constitution, the 14th Amendment, recognized freed slaves as persons. So what corporations did back then is they said, right, well, if a person is the highest status you can have in our culture, we're going to call ourselves persons. And we have this idea that corporations are persons, which means they can have legal rights. And this is what's going to happen with these robots if this idea that they are electronic persons is seen through.
So how would you want to regulate and give some form of legal control over these increasingly clever and potentially autonomous machines?
If we look at AI programs, because many computer networks are connected now by digital system, people can write programs that they can send off into the digital sphere that can create actions in the world that produce effects. So we've seen that with algorithms, for example, that created flash crashes in the stock market. In the real world, the physical world of the embodied robot moving around in space and time in our society, that is actually a more dangerous and more difficult issue. The level of autonomy that is expected in those robots just doesn't exist yet. It's still science fiction.
Kathleen Richardson, a specialist in the ethics of robotics. Matthew Barzun has been the US ambassador to the UK since 2013. He's got just days to go before he goes home, and he's given World Update one of his final interviews. I asked him first, what does he make of the controversy swirling around Donald Trump?
You do see right now we are at this in-between time, right? Obviously after our election in the United States, before the president-elect is inaugurated, and here we are with 8 days left to go. So I think you're seeing kind of maximum uncertainty, really, created by that.
Embarrassment?
You can use that word. I will say maximum uncertainty around, look, the president-elect is building out his team. They're going through their process of checks and balances, testifying in front of the Senate. You see that going on. And at the same time, you see my boss, President Obama, giving his farewell address, running through the tape, as we say, to use a track and field analogy, one president at a time, doing the work that he's been doing. So both those things are happening at the same time. That will continue for the next 8 days. And then my fellow Americans will settle into a new president, and I won't make any more predictions than that, other than my hope is that they will follow the advice, I certainly will, of President Obama, reminding us all that the most important job title in the world is, or certainly in our country, is citizen, right? And citizen, not just voting on election day, that's important too, but doing other things. So if you're unhappy with something, mobilizing and peacefully protesting, and also disagreeing, but doing so with decency.
I will ask you for a bit of advice for President Obama, because he's taken your advice in the past. He's remaining in Washington, ostensibly because of his daughter's education. That's quite unusual. Usually outgoing presidents, they move off somewhere. He's not doing that. Is he would you advise him to be politically engaged?
Oh, it's interesting. I think the advice between President Obama and me has usually flowed in the other direction. I have been I've benefited incredibly from his advice, including the first advice he gave me. I asked him for a word of advice before I became a diplomat, and he gave me just that, and no more, one word: listen. So if you mean engagement in that sense, absolutely. And in his farewell address, he said that. He said, hey, you know what? Maybe if you find yourself bickering with someone you don't even know anonymously on some social media platform, how about take a break from that? I bet that's not very fulfilling. How about you go talk to someone, a neighbor, a colleague, or someone who you disagree with? Do it face to face. Do it in decency. That's what our democracy requires of us also.
Let me ask you for more advice for the British people, because you've lived here, you've been involved in smoothing relations between the United States and Britain. Brexit was a huge development. How should we be taking that here in Britain now? What should we be doing?
I talked about the in-between time we're in America. I think there is a similar thing going on here. We are post-referendum, pre-Brexit. Right? And of course that, just like it does back home, creates uncertainty. That's fine. And I think what I see every day, just yesterday, I went to my 165th secondary school. So I've done a workshop with over 20,000 British sixth formers. And I've learned an incredible thing. And it is, we don't have enough time to get into all of it. But the key thing and the most encouraging thing is these young people are paying attention to the news. They have really high standards of what their own country is doing and saying, really high standards of what the United States, my country, is doing and saying, and are disagreeing and agreeing, and that's really healthy. The worst thing I think we could see is apathy on the one side or cynicism on the other side, both of which are really corrosive to our democracies. Too often we are talking at each other, we are talking past each other, or worse yet, we're not even talking to each other at all, which gets back to President Obama's point to please reach out, go and listen to someone you don't agree with, and doesn't mean you have to start agreeing with them, but you really need to listen, you really need to engage. And we can do that as citizens, one person at a time, and building those kind of bridges makes a real difference.
Well, look, it's been great talking to you. You've been very diplomatic. It's your skill.
Dan, is that a compliment or not really a compliment?
Well, it's a run-up to my last question, okay, which is it's going to be difficult going back to a place where there is a sense of confusion, uncertainty. How comfortable are you with that? What will you do to make America better?
Well, I mean, look, a bunch of things are new back home, for sure. This most recent presidential election, there was a first. The first time we have elected someone who's never held public office before. So yes, America is adjusting to that. But with even a little bit of historical context, we as Americans are really used to transitions. We're used to surprises. This is what we do every 4 and 8 years. So it's not as if the American electorate or the American people are hugely different based on what happened in November. You remember 2000, that came down to a handful of votes in Florida. 2004, 100,000 people. So let's say, to use a British, Wembley Stadium decided that. So if half of Wembley Stadium changed their mind, John Kerry would have been president and not George W. Bush. That same number, 100,000, is what determined our most recent election, too. So that's not new.
Matthew Barson, the outgoing US ambassador to the UK. This week's World Update in Pictures, The History of Madness. London's Wellcome Collection brought together various artists to create the exhibition Bedlam, Asylum and Beyond, tackling the rise and fall of mental asylums, how mental illness is handled now. David Beals is one of the artists taking part, and he's using his first-hand experiences living in psychiatric hospitals to create art to raise awareness around mental health issues. He told me about his work.
I wanted people to know what it was like in the old hospital because I spent nearly 7 years as an inpatient, 2 years of that on the long stay wards. And people don't usually get away from the long stay wards. In fact, it was only because the hospital closed down. But I wanted the patient's view of what it was like and also about care in the community, so to raise awareness.
This is the night medicine trolley,
yes.
tablet time.
Yes, that's in Farnborough Hospital.
Could you just describe the picture for me?
Well, at about 9:45 at night, the nurse would shout out tablet time, and everyone would queue up. And it might be 11 o'clock before they started handing out the tablets. And you get the women in their night dresses, and they would queue up. And that's what that's about. See, no privacy.
So dignity is missing.
You lose your dignity in those places, and you see things that you shouldn't see.
And you told us that some of the patients got their medication in liquid form because they would try and store up the tablets.
Oh, yes, I got caught doing that myself.
Why were you storing the tablets?
But I spit them because I didn't want them because of the side effects. I got the shakes. Now, the NICE guidelines admit that there's things wrong with the medication.
And NICE is the organisation that controls the use of medication and checks on standards, medical standards.
Yes. Now, a lot of patients are put on medication. This is what happened to me. You can't come off on medication in case you have a relapse. Well, I'd rather take the chance. But you don't get that choice. Most patients are medication compliant, and then when they get to my age, they start getting things like diabetes, weight gain. I'm diabetic, and I never lost the weight that I put on in hospital. Patients now, in those days, the nurse, if you were in the hospital, the nurse could monitor you. If you were ill, you'd get treatment. They were trained nurses as well as psychiatric nurses. Now patients are left in the community, often in isolation, in squalor. It's bad enough being on medication in the hospital, but if you are on medication in the community, you're liable to get ill because patients aren't getting their yearly health checks, things like that. And where I am, we're all ill, you know. I've stopped taking the medication, but it damaged me by the time I'd stopped.
One of the situations you talk about is now when people are released into the community and they might be helped to get a flat, but because they're vulnerable, they're really exploited by drug addicts.
Yes, that does happen. What happens is the drug addicts befriend the patients in the community because the patients are at a bit of a disadvantage because they're on medication and that dulls them a bit. Also, they are lonely, probably a bit frightened. Sometimes I've known them to move into someone's flat to the point that that person's had to go back to hospital.
There's a beauty in these pictures, David. Did you find beauty in these places?
You sort of have to. Although there are quarrels with the staff, there were staff who, it was like a calling. They were very dedicated, devoted to their job. And also I liked the other patients there as well. I got on with them, but I was younger. I couldn't go through that now. I couldn't go. For all the things that were wrong, there were things that were, you had the grounds, you had 3 meals a day, you had films, you had socialisation. Now patients don't get that. One thing that's happened since the hospitals have closed, at the same time they closed down day centres and occupational therapy departments and day hospitals. So now we've got nowhere to socialise. And being isolated on medication can't do your illness any good.
Some of these places look really horrible. You've brought out colour and light. You've made images which are almost attractive, although the stories are not. Are things better now? Have these places been closed?
Well, they've been closed. They've been sold off, converted into flats. Flats, usually what they do is close them down, let them stand derelict so that they can't be listed buildings, and they redevelop them. One thing I did consciously was not put the patients all in torment. Try and just paint them as I would and draw them as I would anyone else, because that's what they were, anyone else. I have tried to not take the obvious approach of putting pictures of people in torment, because it wasn't all torment. But I saw things there that haunt me every day. It's easy enough to identify the problem, but it's finding a solution. It's writing the solution, which is a very difficult thing at the moment because there's no money, no resources.
David Beals on his pictures about life in mental hospitals. Do have a look. They really draw you in. This is World Update. A restaurant in Bangladesh has reopened. This is 6 months after a militant siege and massacre left 22 people dead there. It's the Holy Artisan Bakery. It's in Dhaka. The siege lasted around 11 hours. It was an unprecedented attack in Bangladesh. Not everyone inside died. And emerging from that terrible incident, there are stories of incredible bravery. Linda Presley has been to Dhaka, and she met one of the kitchen workers in the restaurant on that fateful night.
Around 8:45, he heard people shouting and there were shots fired. Then all the Bangladeshis, they told him that escape from here, there is an attack from thugs, they're killing people.
Delwar Hussain, a small, good-looking man with haunted eyes, remembers those first moments when he and his colleagues attempted to escape.
They tried to go out from the main gate, but they failed. So they entered the outside bathroom and they rang the owner of the restaurant and told him that some miscreants attacked the restaurant and they're killing people. Please come with the police.
On a stifling summer night, 8 people sought refuge inside that single outside toilet cubicle. At first, it was assumed the attackers were armed thieves, but the shouts of Allahu Akbar told a different story. While the militants brought death and terror to those inside the restaurant, Delwar and his colleagues remained inside that small, confined space for hours.
Inside the toilet, it was unbearable. There was no much oxygen to breathe.
But they did manage to get information out to the Bangladeshi authorities. Monirul Islam is Chief of Counter-Terrorism for Dhaka Metropolitan Police.
Those who were in the toilet, they heard the moaning of the victims, and one informed us that, he has seen the dead bodies. He could not exactly verify the number, but he told that 15 to 20 dead bodies are already there.
By 2 a.m, Delwar and his colleagues had been hiding for more than 5 hours. That was about to change.
One of the guys, the terrorist, he says, "Why is this toilet locked? Open the door now." They were very scared. They didn't want to open the door, but they threatened them, "We'll blast you up with the grenade." He opened the door himself. Then when they came out, they asked them to put their hands up. They held a pistol and a machete. They asked them if they are Muslims or Bengalis, and they said yes. All of them were begging, "Let us go."
But after a minute or so, face to face with 2 of the militants, Delwar and his colleagues were forced back inside the toilet and the door was locked from the outside. As night became day, the men were getting desperate.
They started trying to break open the door because they thought they were going to die without oxygen. And they succeeded in breaking the door at 6 o'clock.
3 of the workers made a dash for it up the stairs and escaped by jumping onto the roof of the house next door. Then another member of staff appeared from the restaurant and told Delwar and the others that the militants had sent him to bring them inside. They were confronted with pure horror.
We saw dead bodies and there was blood all around, and we were so much shaken at that time.
The 5 men joined their colleagues. Because the workers were assumed to be Bangladeshi and Muslim, they had not been killed by the attackers. The militants addressed the staff and tried to justify their murderous rampage against the diners they'd assumed were foreign.
They were talking to us. They said, "Do you know why we have killed these people? Because these people drink alcohol. They also take cannabis, and they don't help the poor."
And after this speech that they made to you, what happened?
Then they said, "We are going to heaven very soon. We will meet in the heavens. You can go." After saying this, the attackers, all of them, went out, raised their thumb. Then there were volleys of shots from everywhere coming down.
Operation Thunderbolt, a Bangladeshi military assault, lasted around half an hour. The militants lay dead on the Holy Artisan's lawn. Delwar Hussain was one of 33 people who escaped with his life that night in Dhaka.
Linda Presley reporting. You can hear more of the stories that Linda found from the Holy Artisan Bakery on this week's assignment on the BBC World Service. You're listening to World Update. Let's Get Me Bodied by the superstar Beyoncé, and one of the dancers in the video for that song is Akira Armstrong. Not your average dancer at 195 pounds, that's about 13 stone or 88 kilos. She doesn't exactly fit the stereotypical mould for a dancer, but she's very talented, even though her size and shape have posed usually insurmountable barriers in the dance industry. Undeterred, she's formed her own plus-size dance troupe in New York City. It's called Pretty Big Movement, and the video of them has gone viral on social media in recent days. How did her teachers and family respond, I asked Akira, when, as a young dancer, it was clear she didn't have a standard physique?
I would say it's between both. I had family members who were supportive, and then I had some who weren't. I had friends, and then I had teachers who were supportive, and then I had some who weren't. But I think the main thing for me was that I had a mother who was very strong, who was very sure of herself, and that she instilled in me. I remember being in high school and getting my report cards, and getting my report cards, and it would say, you need to lose 15 pounds, you need to lose 10 pounds. At the time, I was like 14 years old, and I'm like, really? Like, I'm still developing as a woman. Like, you can't tell me that I need to lose weight when I'm still growing. But as I got older and, transitioned into adulthood, just from my body makeup and my family genetics, I was never going to be a size 5. That's not how I was made. So after a while, I got comfortable with it.
I mean, I've seen the videos of you dancing. It's very beautiful. It is dancing, but I guess you're using different muscles, or you have to practice in a different way. Is that true?
Yes, that is very true. For every genre of dance, there is a technique that you need to develop. I always tell people ballet is the foundation of dance. You need ballet. I've taken ballet. I've taken modern dance, West African, hip hop, gram, tap. All these things are correlated into anything that you want to do in whatever genre of dance. There's a technique behind everything. Even today with these social dances that we have going on, there's a technique behind it, and there's history behind where these dances have come from. So yes, there is definitely a technique behind every genre of dance, no matter what it is.
Now, here's a question that might easily be based on stereotypes, but is there a health issue? Is your heart under greater strain? Because some of these some of these routines you're doing are very tough, aren't they?
Yes, they are. They're very tough, and they require a lot of stamina. And yes, all of us are not, shaped the same, and we're shaped differently, and we carry our weight differently. But what I enforce in my girls that they need to go take classes to strengthen up in their stamina and go to the gym. We all work out. We all eat healthy. I am an advocate of healthy curves. At the end of the day, I just feel like your size doesn't define who you are.
I've seen the videos of the dance. I'd sweat a lot, so you're clearly very fit.
Oh, yes. I'm solid. I'm a solid 195, yes.
And you've worked with Beyoncé?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
Tell us about that.
It was an amazing experience. She's a hard worker. I respect her. So that was a real good time in my life, and I got frustrated in the same sense, even though it was kind of like bittersweet for me. But while I was out there, I was trying to find representation. And it was very hard for me to get that because people were judging me based on how I looked.
Has that changed?
It has changed ever since I created Pretty Big Movement, because it got to the point where I said, you know what, I'm going to create my own lane. I'm gonna follow my own path and create a platform for other plus size women who get rejected from going on these auditions and not getting the opportunities that they are deserving of.
What's the future then for Pretty Big Movement?
I see us traveling all over the world globally, teaching workshops and empowerment panels and encouraging women to do exactly what they want to do, touring with Pretty Big, creating our own tour with other plus size artists. That is my ultimate goal at this point.
Akira Armstrong from Pretty Big Movement, a dance group for women who are not worried particularly about their body image, but want to be able to dance. And you can have a look at the video. Join us for more World Update tomorrow. And you've been listening to World Update from the BBC with our podcast, which is 7 days a week, the World Update Daily Commute.